my name is Jara. I teach people how to garden and grow food. I've been harvesting a lot of beefsteak sized tomatoes, so I need to use it all up in some way. I've decided to make some tomato salsa that can be canned so I can preserve my harvest. This recipe is very easy to make and it's a great introduction to canning. Below in the description, I've listed out the entire recipe along with all the ingredients that you need. I also have several links to Amazon if you want to get any of the same canning supplies that I use. For this recipe, you're going to need a lot of tomatoes. You can use beefsteaks, cherries, aromas, like whatever you have. We're going to need some lemon juice, lime juice, onions, some peppers. I like sweet bell peppers because I don't like my things very spicy. But if you want more heat or spice to your salsa, definitely go with jalapenos, or you can even add some hot sauce to taste. I'm also going to be adding a lot of cilantro because I personally love cilantro, but this is optional. I know that gives some people a weird soapy bitter type of flavor, so if that happens to you, you can totally omit the cilantro. And for some seasoning, we just need some salt and cumin powder. I forgot to add that you need corn as an ingredient because this is a tomato and corn salsa, so I'm just using canned whole kernel corn. You could also use frozen. To get started, we're going to sterilize everything. That's super important when it comes to canning. You want to make sure everything is nice, clean, and sterilized. Also, I highly recommend that you do not change this recipe. Don't change the ratio of things. We need a certain level of acidity to preserve everything properly and that the salsa won't go bad inside of the jars once you store them away. So there is a careful balance between the acidity from the tomatoes and the non-acidic items, if that makes any sense. So don't alter this. I mean, you can definitely substitute different kinds of peppers, different kinds of onions, but don't alter like the ratios of acidic to non-acidic items. I already have my canning pot set to boiling, so the first thing I'm going to do is boil my jars. You can use whatever jars you like. Personally, for salsa, I think the 1 pint jars are a pretty good size. I'm just going to lower this rack in here to sterilize my jars. And they're gonna boil in here for 10 minutes. Sterilizing the lids is a little bit different. So what I like to do is heat up a lot of water in a tea kettle. So it's boiling, but not like a rolling boil. And then we're gonna soak these in this very hot water for 10 minutes. So while everything is sterilizing, I'm gonna go ahead and start prepping all of the ingredients. If you like a chunky salsa, which is my preference, then you can use something like this. This is a quick dicer, and this gets a really nice, perfect size for my tomatoes. If you like a more smooth salsa consistency, then you can throw these tomatoes in like a blender and really chop them up fine. I grew all of these tomatoes in my garden, and if you want to grow the same ones, I have seeds on my website. The 2 varieties that I'm using here are called Tex Wine and Owen's Purple. They're both really big, red, beautiful beefsteak sized tomatoes. Some people don't like the skins of the tomatoes. To be honest, it doesn't bother me, especially in a salsa where everything's kind of chopped up anyways. So I'm gonna leave my skins on, but I am gonna clean these tomatoes up and remove any like brown spots and the core. To remove the core, I find that it's easy to quarter the tomatoes. Then you have real easy access to that little core piece there and you just cut it right off. I got this recipe for a tomato and corn salsa from Ball, and if you're new to canning, they are a great resource. They have a canning book, which is like the Bible of all canning cookbooks. So if you're new to canning and just want to learn more about it, I highly recommend that you get that book. For this recipe, you need 5 pounds of chopped up tomatoes. Let's see how much I have here before I continue. We're a little bit over 5 pounds, but that's fine. My timer just went off for the 10 minutes needed to sterilize the jars. One very important thing to know though is that these jars are super, super hot. So if you remove them out and put them on your cold kitchen counter, they can actually burst. So I have a couple layers of kitchen towels right here to place the jars on there so they don't come in direct contact with the cold kitchen counter. Place your hot jar on top of the kitchen towel. I highly recommend that you get a jar lifter to remove your jars in and out of the pot, and don't use a tong for that because before I had this jar lifter, I used these tongs, and when I was dripping or draining the water out of the jars, it actually came down the tongs and burned my hands. I'm also going to drain out all of the lids. It's time to start dicing everything, and as I dice each ingredient, I will be adding it to another big pot here because we have to cook it all together for 10 minutes before we can start loading it into the jars. This chopper is so easy to use. I just put my ingredients on top and then push it down. Let's chop up these tomatoes. Look at that. Perfect. Next, we need half a cup of lime, lemon juice, or a combination of both. I'm just gonna use both since that's what I have. But as an extra tip, if you didn't know, you should roll your limes or lemons to soften them up a little bit. And that just helps get as much juice as possible out of them before you put them in your citrus press. Let's turn the heat on. I'm gonna put it on high. And then we're gonna add our seasonings. Now the original recipe from Ball doesn't say to add any salt, but I'm gonna add a little bit of salt because I feel that that pulls out better flavor. And then we're gonna add about a teaspoon of cumin powder. This salsa looks so beautiful already, but we're gonna mix everything up and cook it for 10 minutes. So our salsa has finished cooking for 10 minutes. Now you're gonna wanna taste test it and adjust per your preferences. You can add salt, more cumin powder, more cilantro, even garlic, you know, whatever you want. You just wanna make sure that you like this flavor before you start loading your jars. So I'm gonna use this funnel just to make pouring and filling the jars much more easier. We're just gonna ladle the salsa into the jars. You're gonna leave half an inch of space from the very top of the jar. This recipe was enough to fill up 5 one-pint jars. Before we start putting on the lids, we're just gonna sanitize the rims of the jars, and I just like to use a paper towel dipped in some white vinegar. Clean off all of those rims. Lastly, we're gonna put the lids on the jars. Now it's time to load the jars into the canner, and we're gonna boil them for 10 minutes. Make sure that there's enough water in here to cover the tops of the jars by at least 1 or 2 inches. Once the 10 minutes are up, we're just gonna turn off the heat and let this sit for about 5 minutes just to slow down a little bit. It's time to remove the jars, and once again, they're very hot, so you don't wanna place them directly on your cold kitchen counter. You're gonna wanna place them on top of some towels. So I'm gonna let these jars sit here for 24 hours so they can completely cool down. And as you can see in the middle here, this is a little raised dimple. That means the seal isn't tight yet. So as these cool down, you're probably gonna hear some popping noises because it's a vacuum and it basically will suck the air down and pull this dimple down. So it'll be more like a little hole or concave in the middle. That's how you know that the seal had worked and it's properly sealed and ready to be stored away. All right, so there you have it, an easy recipe to make tomato and corn salsa. I'm gonna pop one of these open and give it a try. This is delicious.